Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the I Know a Guy podcast. On this episode, I know a political guy. His name is Alex Patton. Alex is the owner of Ozean Media and former founder of two survey research firms, one of which Mirror Research was acquired by Ozean. Alex has been a paid consultant on every level of political campaigns, including brief international political experiences, and they've won multiple awards for political consulting and political media. He's a seasoned political communication expert, and this year, in a general election, is the perfect person to have come on a podcast. A person that's not paid, that doesn't have anything to gain, in my opinion, other than just sharing some information, maybe on the national level, sort of what's happening. And I've got some observations. And, of course, this year it's Trump versus Biden, and the big story is age. In your experience, I guess the stupid question is, does it matter? And maybe what are your take on that the whole age argument, and then your observations of maybe both candidates in both parties?
Well, I mean, from a political science standpoint and the research standpoint, age does matter. And it matters in the sense that, incumbents are reelected at clips in Congress of like 90%, 95%, very high reelection rates for incumbents. But there's really three times when incumbents lose. One of them is immediately after redistricting. So their district changes and they're not, known to voters, and they have to go out and reintroduce themselves. The second one is usually, and has been referred to as scandal, right? We have a scandal. Scandals traditionally will take 8 points off a incumbent. That has really mitigated in the last couple of years with Donald Trump and the amount of scandals. So probably a scandal is worth maybe 3 or 4 points now. But the other major time when incumbents lose is when they're old. We're talking like really old. And it becomes really much easier for a young whippersnapper candidate and opponent to paint them as old and out of touch. And so we have seen, and there's pretty good, robust amount of literature in political science, that age really does matter. Now, the other data point that shows me that age really matters is that we see it in the polling, right? I mean, we see that on both sides with both candidates, that voters are concerned with their age. Now, what's interesting about this one, because like you just said, we have settled on our two candidates for the two major parties. We have Donald Trump and we have Joe Biden. They are both old, and so we're going to spend, a couple $1 billion over the next 8 months figuring out how much that really does matter to the voters. But, to answer your question shortly, age does matter.
Do you, when you look at both candidates, is this the best America can do?
God, I hope not.
Yeah.
I mean, I really hope not. I do think we're at this unique, almost pinch point in both parties, to where you have two kind of old lions, for lack of a better term, that are there. They're basically both incumbents. You're not going to knock them out. What's really, I think, interesting is look 4 years, 8 years down the road at both parties, and there are really incredible benches that are going to be coming up at the national level for the president and all other offices. I think there's some really unique candidates there.
I did a podcast 2 weeks ago, maybe, or a week ago, and kind of got into the subject a little bit with the candidates, with Donald Trump, and how in my opinion, and you correct me at any time, because this is not my area, I just see myself as a guy who sort of follows politics a little bit. I've listened to the talk radio. I've watched the news. I see the Drudge Report. I see what comes across on my Instagram short reels and things like that, right? It just seems that Trump represents a very far right, that Biden represents what was supposed to be sort of a left center, but he can't get away with that, so he's trying to go far left. And that those two sides at one time in politics were really ignored. They were the radicals, and they were always out there, but now the parties have gone that way. Does that seem correct? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a massive move in polarization in the last 10 years, and so when we measure polarization, and so there is some debate on whether or not we're measuring it correctly. But essentially, we would ask you a bunch of questions about issues, and then we would collapse that into a scale that gives us one number. And so when we look at the average voter on the right and on the left, in the past, since Obama's election, the Republican Party moved left first, and then the Republican Party moved right first, the Democratic Party moved left and soon followed. The other trend that we saw and we do see, is that what I call the political elites, and when I use that term, it's a political science term. It means political officials, elected officials, party officials. They have moved much further and much quicker to the partisan edges than what the public has. Now, the other thing that we have to consider is how engaged the public is, because there's a huge debate in academia between, are we as polarized as everybody thinks we are?
Right.
In my world, and dealing with elected officials and dealing primarily with voters, they are absolutely polarized, right? But there is a major part of America that, for lack of a better term, doesn't really care about politics. And we can ask them an issue on a 10-point scale. How do you feel about abortion? Are you pro-life? Are you pro-choice? On a scale of 1 to 10. And most of the time, if they don't care about that, then they'll just say it's a 5. Put me down as a 5. Or not even if I don't care, but if I don't know about the issue. If I ask you, should we give aid to the Ukraine on a scale of 1 to 10, how passionately do you feel about that? Well, if you don't know about it, you don't know where Ukraine is, give it a 5. So often the voters that are disengaged and are considered to be in the middle are ones that don't have really fully formed opinions on issues. And so it looks like there's a big blob there. The question is do you really take them into account if they're not voting, right? So again, go back to a short answer to your question.
Yeah.
The political elites and the politically involved voters have definitely polarized and moved to the extremes. The people that are generally in the middle are going to be lower engaged, not have a high saliency on issues, and or just not know about the issues. And that's a big swath of America.
And are those people more engaged, do you think, by things like the gas prices, the inflation, or prices, maybe food prices at the grocery store? What moves those people to a candidate versus another?
What's going to be really interesting is that group of voters are going to be the ones that actually decide the election.
Okay.
So probably what's going to move them is what is happening immediately before the election, right? What is happening the week and a half, 2 weeks, because right now, you know this and I know this. Anybody that's in the political elite or that's politically involved, they know who they're voting for, and it is going to take some type of black swan event to get anybody to switch, right?
Right.
That's
absolutely.
locked in.
That's right.
So it's these people that aren't really tuned in, and they're not going to tune in until something happens. So, for example, if Joe Biden were to fall off a stage a week before the election like Bob Dole did, that would have tremendous effects. If gas prices spike $1, or we go to war, or there's a terrorist attack, some type of black swan, that's really going to be probably what seals this election, one way or the other.
Is that kind of like the October surprise? Everybody's waiting for something to happen?
The October surprise, and it does matter.
So what you do is you make sure Joe Biden has a ramp to walk up and not steps.
And you put a rail.
It's actually what do you call those? Not escalator, but a thing that you just stand there and it delivers you right to your spot.
That's right.
Well, okay, so I think that's what Nikki Haley was trying to make an argument for, right? She was trying to say, look, Trump's got his people, but he doesn't resonate with those people you're talking about in the middle, right?
Well, and he does for some.
Okay.
But Joe Biden also appeals them for some, right? So, when you talk about the middle and when you talk about independents, and they're not the same, but people that are registered independents share a lot with kind of people in the middle. They're not highly attached to a party. So they will and can go. A vast majority of independents are closeted partisans. They traditionally vote Republican or traditionally vote Democrat. The only thing they really share is they dislike both parties. So they don't want to call themselves a Democrat or Republican, even though they act that way.
Understood.
The true swing vote in this country is probably about 5%. And those voters are really deciding if they're going to show up to vote at all. And if they do, it's probably going to be something that is happening right then and there during that time period right before the vote.
So if you're – okay, so there's some argument, well, look, we have to turn out our people. Forget
a base strategy.
So if we just get our voters out, we don't need to worry about them. in the middle or those who are sort of disinterested, we just got to really get ours out. What is your experience in what is successful? What happens and what?
I'll give you the political science answer, right? It depends, right? I mean, if you're talking about a state house race, a state senate race, one of them that's going to be almost certainly decided in the primary, it's a total base strategy, total base strategy. If you are running statewide or you're running nationally, then that's a whole different concept, right? And those voters that are, quote, in the middle, those voters that are lower engaged voters that don't care, they are going to decide the election. So that's, you can't, I don't think right now you can run a base election.
So you've said research multiple times. So you have a company, a consulting firm, but you also teach, correct?
Correct.
At State University or college?
Yes.
Okay, so you're in this stuff. You see it. You see the data. I want to take you to 2012.
Okay.
This is Mitt Romney, Barack Obama, if I'm correct. I'm at a political fundraiser for a gentleman running for a U.S. representative position in the state. And I see a pollster there, a guy that I know that runs a company that does similar stuff. And I just said, hey, this election's coming up. It's Romney. It's Obama. What do you think? I mean, it seemed that after Obama's first 4 years, a bunch of people were really, really not happy with him and pissed off. But that might be just people that I run in circles with. I don't know. And they said, well, it's going to come down to Florida. And in Florida, it's going to come down to the I-4 corridor, Tampa to Orlando. And Mitt Romney is winning that corridor. I said, wow. So I thought confidently that I knew sort of what was going to happen here in Florida, and that didn't happen. He lost it. How does a pollster, I get they don't have a crystal ball, but what data are they using? How are they getting it wrong? Is it a bad sample size? What is it?
That's a really good question because I get a lot of questions from the press about polling, and I do think that a lot of times the press just bonks polling. I also think there's a lot of garbage polling out there. Doing a poll now with the decrease in landlines, the increased cost that you have to go to cell phones, multimodal polling, it is expensive, right? For us to conduct a statewide poll, minimum $25,000.
Wow.
Right? So, I mean, the cost of polling, good polling, has gone up. I can do a statewide poll for $1,500. It's going to be garbage, right? But one of the major things and the polling as a whole has not been as off as a lot of people think it has, right? And that has to do with, the confirmation bias that we have. We get a poll that we don't like, therefore all polling sucks. Or this pollster got it wrong, therefore all polling sucks. That's not the way this is kind of going down. If you do a good poll, it's usually a good poll. One of the big errors coming in, especially with Trump, especially with Obama that you were talking about, is we have to make inherent assumptions when we're polling of who we think is going to show up to vote, right? So I'm going to basically use all of my experience in past returns and polling, and I'm going to try to create a universe of, let's just say it's going to be 15% African Americans. It's going to be this many Hispanics. It's going to be this many whites. It's going to be, and then I'm going to stratify that. It's going to be this many whites with a college education, this many whites with a high school diploma. If any of those assumptions are wrong, then your poll can be off, right? So one of the bigger errors that we saw with Trump was there were a bunch of people kind of in the Tea Party vein, that were kind of in the blue collar vein, that hadn't voted a lot. They didn't have a lot of voting history, and they weren't accounted for. So that was a surprise vote with Donald Trump. You also see it on the Democratic side because so much of the Democratic coalition, the winning coalition, relies on minority voters and young voters. Those groups tend to be unreliable voters. And so how do I, as a pollster, go in and try to identify how fired up young people are to vote? And if I get that wrong, then the back end of my poll can be wrong. So a lot of it has to be, what assumptions is the pollster using when they're weighting? So one of the costs, right? So if I want to keep costs down on a poll, then I'm going to poll people that have a verified history of voting, right? Because I can get that data and I can do that model really easy. If I want to try to go out, especially in a presidential year, especially in one that is just weird, like Donald Trump has brought weirdness to the electorate, right? Then I have to go in and I have to ask not as much of using the voter file to poll. I've got to cast a much wider net and try to talk to people that may have never had a history of voting, but maybe they're going to vote this time. That's a much more expensive poll to conduct, right? And so I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of cheap polling that are making some bad assumptions to keep the poll cheap, and then you're seeing some errors in polling.
So I was listening to the news today, and a bunch of polls just came out, right? And they're all saying, not all, but there's some big ones. What's the one that I always hear? Pew Research or Quinn Winnipeg or something like that, whatever you call it. It seems that they're saying Trump's actually in the lead, is what these polls are showing. You know how you see headlines on TikTok or Instagram, and there's like clickbait? Are some of these companies like the ABC poll, they're doing these polls as clickbait to create a story so they can write and talk about it? How many of these polls are scientific and legit and someone's trying to find out information? How many of them are agencies just trying to create a conversation and a story?
There's a lot of that going on, right? So we've had this phenomena for the last couple election cycles to where people are aggregating polls, right? Because no one poll dictates things. So you have Real Clear Politics, you got 538. So they will take polls, they will average them together, and they will say, okay, the average tells us this. So you've seen a lot of polling shops pop up that are trying to game that average. So they're trying to pump out lots and lots of polls to push an average up. So we've seen an onslaught of just garbage polls, right? Now, and so this is where as a pollster and as a consumer of polls, you really have to know the credibility of the pollster. Pew is one of the gold standards, right? That doesn't mean they always get it right, but Pew is a gold standard. Other ones have a long history of missing, right? And so, one poll doesn't really dictate where we're going. And at this point, they're so unreliable that you almost have to take them with a grain of sand. So when I'm reading polls now, I'm really more looking for trends that are over a couple of week periods, And so even right now, I'm not comfortable in saying, who's winning and who's losing, because if it's a national poll, it doesn't count. That's the the trap that I fell into when Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. Because so many of the national polls showed Hillary Clinton with a lead, and she won. She won the national vote.
That's right.
Those don't matter. There's about 5 to 6 states right now that if you're not deep polling in, those are the ones that matter, and those will be the ones that are going to decide the election. It's kind of fun to look at a national level because we can see our demographics moving. What are women doing? How are women responding to the abortion issue? But unless we're looking at women in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, it's not going to show us a whole lot on what the eventual outcome is going to be.
So Florida.
Yep.
Florida's a state that's kind of gone back and forth, but seems to have gone more red in the last, year and a half, 2 years. There's a lot more registered Republicans, I believe, now than it used to be. It used to be more Democrat.
About 1 million more.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So it's a big number. Tell me, and a lot of folks may not realize this, that there are a lot of states in this country that really don't get the political attention because they already know where they're going. They know, for example, in Wyoming. I'm assuming Wyoming's a red state.
It's pretty red.
Okay. And that there's no reason to spend advertising money in Wyoming. You're going to get that state. There's your points. But Florida, you get to see the ads. You get all the flyers in the mail. You get to see Republican, Democrat coming across. Do you think Florida still gets that? Or do you think Florida goes, hey, this is probably going to be a solid Trump state. He lives here now. Sean Hannity, his best friends moved down close by, and they're going to Donald Trump? Or do you think they still focus on a state like Florida, and we still see the kind of content from both parties trying to get it?
I think that's going to be a matter of resources, right? And so right now, you actually have the Democratic Party and their apparatus with more resources than the RNC and the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign is spending a tremendous amount of resources on legal bills. Every dollar that goes to legal bills is not one that he can spend in campaign and communication with voters. That's going to be a problem. $50 million alone, the last year, that's a big, big number, right? So, we've seen some major trends in Florida. During COVID and after COVID, we had significant immigration into the state, most of them Republicans. We see continued growth in the Villages, a very red area, and so Florida, by any measure in the last year or two, has become significantly more red. Mm-hmm. Now, what's also interesting is I would probably tell you that I think Florida is still in play, So a couple of reasons lead me to believe that. The last cycle, and when I say the last cycle, I'm talking about Nikki Fried running and Charlie Crist running against DeSantis. Yep. DeSantis wins by 20 points. It's an absolute blowout.
Right.
And so the conventional wisdom is that Florida is deep red. DeSantis proved it. Plus 20, it's over. I think the real story is the 100% complete collapse of the Democratic Party. They pulled every dime out of here. They didn't spend any money. And it collapsed. The other interesting thing that I'm watching really closely, Nikki Fried, when she was running against Charlie Crist, and Charlie Crist, when he was running even against Governor DeSantis at that time, they attempted to make abortion an issue. And this was before Dobbs was overturned. Or I'm sorry, Roe versus Wade was overturned. Nikki nor Charlie Crist moved the needle on the abortion issue at all. It did not matter. It had zero effect on the election. Now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned, now that we are starting to see rights taken away and restrictions put on the issue, you're seeing swaths of the electorate in Florida activated. So, now the Democratic Party in Florida has a unique history of ineptness. I mean, they are terrible. Mm-hmm. Nikki Fried is a friend of mine. I think she's doing about as well as she can, but it's really going to be up to the DNC and whether they decide that they're going to try to put Florida in play, right? So if you're Nikki Fried, you're trying to get it to a point of viability where you can convince the DNC to come in and spend resources. If they do not do that, then I think you'll just see the Republicans run away with it again.
Well, they continue to dominate in the leadership in the House and the Senate here in the
Absolutely.
state of
Florida. I mean, they got supermajorities.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And some of that has to do with the way the districts are drawn. It has to do with the lack of competitive districts. It has to do with the lack of Democrats in their bench. I mean, they have run some truly, awful candidates. It's a difficult road for them.
I've had some folks make an argument to me that, the Republicans are, horrible and how they drew these districts and how they've done that. Don't both parties do the same thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you look at redistricting and you look at, what people will call gerrymandering across the United States, it's really more of a function of power, right? So the most gerrymandered state on the Democratic side is Illinois by any measure. The most gerrymandered state by any measure on the Republican side is Texas. So there's been some interesting research that says kind of you look at it as a national thing, there's really not a whole lot of difference. The Republicans and the Democrats are canceling each other out by gerrymandering in Congress, right?
Yeah.
And we can go on and on and on about gerrymandering because it's almost like the Supreme Court definition of porn. I can't define it, but I know when I see it, right? So the problem with gerrymandering is there's two things. One, nobody has a clear definition of how to define it and where the line is, right? So in the absence of any type of line, then political players are going to try to maximize their return. That's what they do. The other thing that is really, really sticky is there's a racial component on top of it. Because of the Voting Rights Act, because of what happened in the 1990s, and because of the requirement to draw minority access districts, right? Those are districts which don't ensure, but make it highly probable that a minority candidate will be elected, right? Mm-hmm. So those were first instituted in Florida in 1990. That was a deal between the Republicans and the Black Caucus. And so it was, we will draw these seats to ensure, make it highly probable that an African-American will get elected. And so when you do that, you pack Democrats and you pack African-Americans into these seats. So for the Democratic Party, here's the challenge. For the Democratic Party to be more competitive in more seats, then you have to dilute the minority access seats, right? So to where, I'm going to make up some numbers so I don't get myself in any trouble. But if we draw a seat or a seat is drawn to have a high probability of electing an African American. And that can be done with 66% of the Democratic vote. If we move Democrats out of that seat, then it becomes a little bit more competitive, right? So every time that's been tried, you always end up getting sued by the African American that occupies that seat. Corinne Brown did it. You know, the gentleman up in North Florida did it also. I can't remember his name now, Congressman in 4. So it's really, really sticky, right? So nobody can clearly define what it is and where the line is. But 2, when you add racial politics on top of it, it gets really ugly really fast.
Well, you mentioned Corinne Brown. So, Jake, I don't know if you know this. Corinne Brown's district, correct me, Alex, if I'm wrong, I think was started in Jacksonville and ran all the way down to Orlando.
Correct.
This little sliver that went through, did it come through Alachua County into Marion County?
A little bit.
And it was like a worm, right? And that was her district. And it was just, is there not a positive to that, right? Does that not give representation to a minority?
It does. Right? So that's the catch.
Right.
You know, so, but the argument is we've made them so safe that we're, quote unquote, wasting Democratic votes.
Okay.
Right? Because when so many African Americans and so many Democrats are packed into one district, then the districts that surround it become much more red. Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, again, it's really sticky, and nobody wants to admit that, right? And everybody hates gerrymandering. They hate politics. It's all the district's fault. But also, there's an upside to it, right? We get representation of the people that look like me. So
when I was in politics a little bit, I sort of got exposed to this organization, this group called Lobbyist, and because I didn't, it's like, what's a lobbyist? And so it was like, oh, the politicians are crooked. Oh, they're horrible. They're bad people. We send them up there and they're doing something different. And I started to just objectively look and go, well, you elected Joe Schmo to go represent you. And when Joe Schmo got there, Joe Schmo had the teachers union, the firefighters, the police, the, the realtors union, anybody and their mama begging them to do different things. And some of them might be counter to what somebody else wants. It's almost like you're in a lose-lose situation if you're elected in some of those positions, and you just have to say, hey, there's my area, my lane, and I'm staying there, and I don't care who I piss off. But I almost wonder if where our country is right now in politics, even up to the national level, it's our fault as voters, no?
What do you mean?
Well, we pull these folks in so many different directions. They don't have a choice but to go a certain way. We have radicalized the Republican Party or radicalized the Democratic Party. I guess I can't speak to a specific example of something that maybe Donald Trump has done, but I think, okay, when it comes to spending money, right? If I want to keep politicians pander to their audience constantly, right? And that audience could be powerful. And we talk about farmers and sugar in South Florida and things like that. But I believe that politicians in Tallahassee, and there's a bunch of them and across the whole country, deal with these different organizations or groups, and you really can't make anybody happy. So if nobody's happy because you went and you supported, let's say, firefighters and their initiatives, or let me get off firefighters because that's not as controversial. Let's say charter schools versus public schools.
Okay.
And I pandered to charter schools, then I pissed off all the teachers in the public schools. And so now I've got all these teachers after me, and they're creating these stories and these ideas of what we are as politicians in Tallahassee that just creates this negative thing. But maybe the politicians weren't trying to do something negative. They're trying to create a solution for parents that aren't happy. Ultimately, nobody's ever happy. Not everybody's happy because the parents are saying, hey, we want better opportunities for our kids to go to school. So we'd like the charter school operation. The public schools over here are going, well, you're doing charter schools. You're taking more money and vouchers from our schools and what we can do. So then you have Vivek Ramaswamy. He had this big thing talking about the machine and how it continues to – its purpose isn't really to serve. It's to keep itself alive. So if you're a teacher, what's more, and I knew a teacher years ago got really, really mad at Governor Rick Scott, and she was mad because, and this was a Republican lady who was always conservative, but got upset because he said, look, no longer are we going to contribute on behalf of your retirement. You're going to have to pay more out of your check for your own retirement. And now she's mad, and now she's upset, and now she's with all these other teachers who are pissed at Rick Scott and whatnot. So I just think that sometimes maybe we put politicians in a no-win position. I'm not saying that so let's go to the Senate. Let's go to Florida. Let's go to the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate can sort of do what they want on this TikTok thing, kind of, right? I'm in for 6 years. The House is more representative of the people, right? And today was a 300 and something vote to 352 to 65. That represents more here. So those people are going to be more responsive to what the populace want, the people want, whereas the Senate's not going to be. But I think we've created this environment we're in as it starts with us as the voters. No?
Starts with
the people. It starts with us as voters, is putting those people in, and ultimately you're going to be the ones that you think there's some powerful organization that just runs the whole thing and tells us all what to do? I mean,
well,
yeah, I mean, are we all sheep and we just follow it?
no, I mean, you got to look at it as a gigantic feedback loop.
Okay.
Right. And if you start trying to find what's the one causality, what's the one cause of what is this system doing, I think that becomes really, really difficult. Right. And so if I'm trying to simplify all of this, then my theory is, and it's one that's really old and really prevalent in political science, which is if you want to understand a politician's behavior, then you have to understand that they are single-minded seekers of reelection. So they are going to do what they think is going to get them reelected, right? And so that explains a lot. And I think that is why state house legislators act differently than state representatives in Congress, and why senators often act different. Because you said it, the House is supposed to be more responsive to the people. The Senate is supposed to be this cooling saucer of democracy, right? Where everything gets fleshed out and gets hammered out in a genteel, deliberative kind of way. It doesn't really work that way, because of the filibuster and the rules that are all around there. I mean, getting the Senate to 60 votes to get anything out of that is almost nearly impossible, right? So whose fault is it? It's this entire system that we have. It is everyone's fault, and I'm not sure if we can point to one thing and say that's the reason, but if you want to explain some politicians' behavior, if they come from a district that only the primary matters, right? Because it's not competitive in a general election. So the only thing they're worried about is getting primary to their right or their left. They're going to make sure that they're going to be on those extremes, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at every congressional seat, if you look at every state house seat, if you look at every state Senate seat in the state of Florida, there's only a handful of them that can be considered to be competitive. The precinct is the smallest unit we have for analysis in political returns. I did an analysis of every single precinct in the state of Florida. And a vast, vast majority, well over 60%, are 60-40 splits in precincts, right? So people are choosing to live around people that look like them, think like them, and act like them politically. And that's one of the major divides.
So 60-40 is a big number?
Oh, it's a big number in precincts, right? I mean, you're looking at 64% of every precinct in Florida is 60-40. Right? There's a 20-point spread on average between the Republican and the Democratic candidate, right? I mean, that's a big number, and it takes minor miracles to flip seats and flip precincts that are in 60. They're long-term investments if you're trying to flip them, usually having to deal with immigration and people moving.
Which makes sense as to why when the polls close, they might automatically start calling certain seats, places in elections because they already know where they're going.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell... so that's a whole different science on when you call an election. But yeah, you can tell that there are long-term stable trends that are there. And, if they're starting to mimic those trends, then you can see where that race is going pretty easily.
So how long would you say you've been following politics in general?
Oh, man, since I was in high school. It's always been something that I've read about, looked at, and I had a pretty unique high school experience in the sense that I grew up in Europe. I lived in Heidelberg, Germany. And so my first job, there's a major university in Heidelberg. And so my first job was for a scientist who was here, and his son was trying to learn English. And so we would get together in a pub and we would read The Economist magazine and argue about politics. And I got paid for that. And I thought that was the coolest job in the world.
That's awesome.
And so it's always just been something I've been interested in. And so I don't know.
How long were you in Germany for?
Most of my life. So I was there, a total of when I say most of my life before college, I was in Heidelberg for I think 3 to 4 years, and then I was in Heidelberg from 7th grade until I graduated from high school.
Did you ever come to the States?
Yeah. So my family is from Alachua.
Okay.
My dad's family and his 8 brothers and sisters all grew up in Alachua on 235, heading out towards Newberry. So this was where my granny and grandpa lived. And so usually every other summer, we would come back to Alachua and, see them and play around. So yeah, we would come back usually once every other year.
So my curiosity is there a perception of America living over there versus actually coming back and living here?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that is probably something I fall back on, in the sense that I can put myself in that mindset and I can get a little bit of distance when I look at American politics, and you can kind of, because of the way I grew up, I can always compare it to the European system, and the European system is not better, it's different, and I could argue that the American system is better, but it probably depends on your values.
Would the European system be something that consists of more party representation than just 2?
Yeah. They have proportional government. On the whole, they have proportional government, and so it gets really, really kind of crazy in the sense that they have very strong political parties, because if you want to run for office in Europe, you got to be on the political party list, right? If you want to be an MP, if you want to be something like this. So when you go to the ballot, you're actually voting for the party. And then proportionally, if the Green Party wins 5% of the vote, then they go, you get this many seats, which are 5% of parliament, and then they just go down the list and they hit the cutoff, right? So if you want to be a good party member, you want to be at the top of the list. So if what's interesting is if you have all those proportions and nobody's at 50% plus 1, then they have to form a coalition government. So what is happening all throughout Europe right now, which is really fascinating, the far-right populist parties are growing, the nationalist parties. They're winning elections throughout Europe. The centrist right parties are now forced to, I want to make a coalition government with the far-right fascist nationalist parties in Europe, or I want to try to cut a deal with the center left. And so you're seeing that play out all through Europe, which is really pretty fascinating.
So that center group is powerful then, no?
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting. So when you say right and you say left, I know what it means in the United States. Is it similar to that in Europe? Very
similar. I mean, again, what's interesting about the European system is you can see the spread of ideology in multiple parties, 6, 7, 8, 9 parties. In America, we just collapse them into 2. Mm-hmm. The ideologies are there, but they're just housed within the parties.
Okay.
So, and again, what we're trying to figure out is how much of the Republican traditional coalition is leaving and going somewhere else, or just checking out of the system. And also on the Democratic side, what's happening there.
Fair statement to say that more liberal-leaning individuals live in cities, not all, and more conservative folks are more rural?
Correct.
Same thing in Europe.
Yeah.
Same thought. And that was my experience. I've been to Europe a couple times, and when I went there, you just sort of found it, I hate to say it, you sort of identified maybe a little more. I was in Paris, and the people were all very nice. I don't think I ran into a bad person anywhere we were, but you just the life for me, who've grown up in a rural area, when you went to a rural part of Europe in France, it was like, okay, this feels more like home. There's more land here. The prices seem cheaper.
Oh no,
no.
Oh no, the rural prices are the land is very expensive. Cost of living,
food. I was talking about.
Yeah,
you got restaurants and going to places like that. But when you're also, across the street from Louis Vuitton in Paris, it's going to all be expensive.
A lot of that, what you're seeing, and it's always been there, but a large portion of that in the last 10 years, including Brexit, has been driven by the immigration issue, right? So you can say a lot of Americans' politics has been animated by the immigration issue. Same thing in Europe. They had the Syrian refugee crisis to where, and the way and this is different from when I grew up, but now if you get into the EU, then there's really no borders left inside the EU. So once you're inside the EU, you can move around wherever you want. So once the Syrian refugees were able to get into the EU, then they had a major, major, major issue. And so they were trying to get the different countries within the EU to see, okay, this is how many we're going to accept. And so that turned into a major deal. So the base that I grew up on, it was a military base. it used to be the headquarters for Europe. And so all of us lived segregated inside a base that was secure because it was a base that had a lot of generals on it. Security was really high. Part of the reallocating of resources, they've closed that base now. And so they're in the process of giving all of those buildings and facilities back to the Germans. And the Germans are rehabbing them. But where I used to live, because it is secure and because it was housing, it was used to house refugees. And it turned into just a nightmare for a while because they weren't vetting a lot of the refugees that were coming in. They were compressing them into an area, they were containing them, and then they turned into kind of, for lack of better terms, ghettos of crime. And it was really, really, really kind of a nasty situation. You saw a massive backlash across all of Europe, right, into immigration. And then where were immigrants, once they were processed, where would they go to congregate? They would mostly go inside cities, right? Because you have an enclave of this type of nationality and this type of nationality. So that's driving some of that too. It can be traced right back to immigration.
Which is an issue in the United States right now. At least it's a hot topic.
Absolutely.
Thoughts on it? Thoughts on just the number of immigrants that have come to the country and the different nationalities when you hear that, I don't have the percentages exactly, but there's been thousands of Chinese nationals who've come across the border.
I mean, it's overwhelming, right? I mean, that's the issue. It's overwhelming.
Hard to sustain?
You can't sustain it. You know, there's just too many people. And then every time that this Congress and past Congresses have tried to tackle it, it has just imploded immensely. Senator Rubio, when he was first elected, became part of the Gang of Eight. They tried to do it. This last deal, right, is probably dead, right, as far as what's been offered. So
why can't they just close it?
Because it's a multifaceted issue, right? It's much, much bigger than people just come across the border and close the border, right? In the sense that we have always been a place that welcomes people that are seeking asylum from political prosecution. You know, I mean, you can look at what happened in Florida with Cubans, right? So they fled a prosecution, and you know they overwhelmed Miami and South Florida for years. Eventually, they got the resources and they processed it, right? And so that's what we're seeing. Some of it's a lack of resources. Some of it is, you know, much bigger issues in the sense that there are big business interests that rely on immigrant labor as a low-cost labor thing, so they don't want to see the border shut, right? So you've got that part of it. Another part of this is students, right? The large part of people that are here are not a large part, but a significant part are overstaying student visas. Right now, how much sense does it make that we bring somebody into a major university, we educate them to be a nuclear scientist, and we ship them back off to China?
No, you don't want to do that.
Right? So, you know, and again, when we start talking immigration, this immigration is so big, the issue, so multifaceted, that it just doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. You know, now we're getting ready in Florida to potentially have a major, major issue with the complete and total collapse of Haiti. Right? We currently have 200 and something thousand Haitians that live in Florida. Haiti is 600 miles away from Florida. You could see almost the Cuban boat lift maybe repeat itself, you know, because Haiti is now controlled by gangs. The whole country has collapsed. So, you know, if you're Ron DeSantis, you're looking down and you probably need to start preparing, you know, South Florida to figure out what you're going to do and what the plan is.
So some folks I've heard, you know, people say, oh, well, America needs to mind its own business and stop being police in the world. But if you don't, they could be coming across your border trying to get, right?
So Haiti's actually a great example of this, right? Okay, we ignore what's going on in Haiti as a country. It's still going to land, most likely, somewhere in South Florida. Right? So should we as America, as a country, decide it's in our interest and engage in Haiti? Right? We've tried to do that in the sense that we were flying the PM around and couldn't get back in because the whole airport collapsed. But, I mean, we have some different options, you know? So, you know, this is where the pragmatic side of me comes in, right? You can ignore it if you want to. It's still going to land in your lap.
That's right.
You know? Now, and again, I'm a kid that grew up in Europe. I'm a kid that grew up on NATO bases, right? So I understand and I believe that NATO and these types of things are squarely in the United States' interest. And I think that the whole protectionist and the whole let's just not be I just don't think that's practical. I think that's just bad.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine and Russia.
Yep.
Because I'm telling you, my knowledge is so limited on it, and I think it's not as limited as I'm confused.
Okay.
When it first started, when we first heard about Russia doing this Ukraine invasion, Congress wanted to stay out of it completely.
Some.
Okay. Not most.
Some.
My observation, and it's just what I'm telling you through my social media, through watching a little bit of news, hearing on the radio, is that it was not a big deal, but then we jumped in with our feet and everything, and it became this huge deal. So you're saying it was a big deal?
And again, I think we're all a product of our stories, right? We're all a product of our biology and our history.
Okay.
You know, I grew up with Russia as the enemy.
Okay.
Right? I mean, I was living now when I lived in Europe, it was West Germany and East Germany. Berlin was East Berlin and West Berlin.
Okay.
It was still a divided country. Russia was the enemy, period. Right? And again, we stood there in the Fulda Gap. The Fulda Gap is a place where if Russia was going to invade Europe, they're going to come right through the Fulda Gap. So this is really something that I'm passionate about and I care about, right? In the sense that, and I still am angry that I left Germany probably 3 months before the wall came down. I'm still pretty angry about that. But, I've been to Russia. I've been in communist countries, right? When Czechoslovakia was still communist and this types of things. They're not great places. They are bleak. And when you understand Russia, and I'm not a Russian expert. I just know from my experiences and everything that I've been around, Russia does not have good intentions for America. Russia is going to and has invaded Ukraine, and I have zero doubt that if they are successful in Ukraine, they're not going to continue. The challenge is with NATO, right? So NATO is not only a defense organization, but essentially the organization is a mutual response organization. If he attacks a member of NATO, we all are by contract, for lack of a better term, by treaty, we're all going to respond. And so NATO has to respond. So I just don't see Russia stopping. I don't. And I think it's going to be one of these things to where it's just like Haiti. You can respond to it over there, right?
Yep.
Or we're going to respond to it initially or eventually. So, Ukraine, in my opinion, has shown tremendous courage, right? Mm-hmm. You give them more bullets, you give them more guns, you give them more tanks. I think they will beat back Russia.
Now that's interesting about Russia's strength, because my entire life it's been Russia and China, and it's been how powerful they are. And I don't know what a United States military action against Ukraine would look like. But I would imagine it would have been far better outcome than what Russia has done to Ukraine. I would have thought Russia would have squashed Ukraine very, very quickly, based on my entire life hearing how powerful Russia is, and the U.S. has to watch out. It seems they've struggled, and they've taken some losses I wouldn't have expected they would have taken.
Well, again, and when I say Russia, when I'm talking about in the late 80s, I'm really talking about the USSR, right, which is bigger than Russia. So we saw a total and complete collapse of the USSR, which is why Russia is trying to rebuild and fight so hard, because they felt humiliated when the USSR disintegrated, right? So a lot of them still look as the Ukraine, which was part of the USSR, as their territory. So you've seen the collapse of the USSR, and then you've seen Russia try to rebuild. So they're a little bit stronger than what I would have put them back in the late 80s, because they really were kind of a paper tiger. So they're stronger, and they're fighting for pride and national unity and that type of stuff. So, I kind of get it in that sense, but, I would much rather give the Ukrainians what they need to finish the job and to beat back Russia than to get us with boots on the ground and be involved in another war in Europe.
So recently, China and Russia are having some issues potentially. Did you see that last week?
Yeah, they're also having a lot of collaboration. That's truly terrifying.
Well, so that's what's interesting, right? We get into the whole TikTok debate thing that's going on, right? People are talking about it's good or bad. I think everybody's kind of agreeing it's bad in terms of it's run by China, or at least in part. and their ability to control information that is seen here that maybe they don't actually provide and show over there, right? It's a whole different TikTok over in China. So the fight is against TikTok, but so much of, I say so much, there's not a ton, but they're a huge importer of Chinese products to America.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the fight there? They're a huge importer of pharmaceutical. Where's the fight there, right? If TikTok is bad because of China, then why is the NBA organization going over there and playing basketball games? Why are we engaging them and not trying to disassociate ourselves on all levels if they are an enemy, if they're not in our best interest? Or is it just it's just too complicated? You just can't?
I think it's easy. Why we're trying to engage in China is because we're capitalist. And it's such a huge potential market, right?
Yep.
The NBA, everybody else wants to sell products and sell goods into China. TikTok is unique, and I do think I won't have TikTok on my phone. Now, my kids have it. They love it. They enjoy it. But I think if you step back, because it's not only China, but what we're doing with the technology is, when you go to Netflix and you watch a show, right, you're going to get a recommendation at the end. And when you get to the end of a movie, those recommendations tend to be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Crappy, right? They're not that good. That's because you got to sit through a 2-hour movie in order for Netflix to know what you like. The issue with TikTok is you're giving them hundreds, if not thousands of data points on what you like as an individual. Now, when you take that out to a national scope, we are training China's AI on how to use it against us. And we're doing it with so many data points. And that's what makes TikTok different than Twitter or X or Facebook. We're not scrolling it for an hour at a time, giving them all these data points. The data points that we do know, because we don't know, their algorithm is hidden, but you can kind of reverse engineer some of it in patents, and things they look at. When you upload a video to TikTok, it encodes everything. When the music starts, what kind of voice you use. Are there, what type of movements? Are you kicking? Are you doing this? One of the most interesting data points they collect is what your battery is. It's like, why are you doing that? Well, if the battery's really low on my phone and I'm still watching TikTok, then I'm really into this stuff, right? So it's just, we're giving them hundreds and thousands of data points on how to use against us politically. Now, what also is interesting is, so they've got dials they can tune up, right, on who's going to get more exposure and who's not going to get more exposure. And we saw that just this week, and I think it's going to backfire on them. So they turned the dial up on trying to get all these TikTokers to call congressional offices. And they did. They flooded congressional offices with calls asking them not to ban TikTok. And you're kind of like, that's kind of the use case we're talking about here, right? We trained you on how to activate all these people to do this.
Wow.
So that's a problem. And it's especially a problem if it's on governmental devices because they're just getting so much data. So, where the line is, and again, I'm a father. My kids have it. I think most of this stuff, if I'm rating it, is highly negative as far as just how humans interact and for childhood development. But I also understand that's how they communicate. So I don't know where the line is. We're still trying to figure it out.
Do you believe that China created this app or is definitely using this app for a negative intention purpose toward the United States? Like it's a negative. Do you think it's a military operation?
I don't know if I would go that far.
Okay.
I would say that it has. I don't think we understand the potential that it has, right? So it's kind of like, I think China's got the capabilities to do tremendous damage right now in an informational warfare kind of hacking thing. I think this is just another tool they could use, as a chaos agent or to, get Americans to turn on each other.
So I heard a Republican lawmaker, I think he was out of Kentucky, was saying that he voted no on the bill, right? He does not support banning because it came down to he didn't believe the government should determine what you have the right to watch or not. It came down to rights.
Yep.
Find it interesting that both parties seem to pick and choose what you should have the right to do or not to do. I think conservatives have for most part have always said freedom and you control yourself and smaller government, but that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, I think that whole logic is completely out the window now, and
it's archaic now. It's just antique ideas, vintage now.
I think it's bullshit now.
Yeah,
from the Republican side. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cuss.
Yeah, you're good. I don't care.
I mean, I think it was a line that if you're conservative, we all bought. Right? We all believed in local control. We all believed in liberty. We all believed in freedom. We don't see that coming out of Tallahassee right now. We don't really see that coming out of the federal government, right? And that's a real challenge, and so I don't know what the Republican Party stands for anymore, because again, you can see Donald Trump with TikTok. Donald Trump and TikTok, when he was in office, he tried to make them divest from TikTok. 2-3 days ago, he's like, TikTok's not that bad.
I heard that.
Yeah. So, again, it's a line that you have to draw as a parent, right? Because the data is pretty overwhelming. These social media accounts, not just TikTok, but all of them, have a detrimental effect on mental health with kids.
Sure.
The challenge is they all use it to communicate, right? And so if you take all that away from your kid, then, that becomes very rough. What's really interesting is I was a judge at a debate for some 8th graders. And the question was, should social media be banned for 16 and younger? These kids were 7th and 8th grade. They're all under 16. They all took the position that social media should be banned.
Really?
And I was floored, right? And I was like, well, you guys would have to you understand that you would lose access to your accounts. And they were like, yeah, we know this stuff is bad. It makes us feel bad.
Wow.
But they don't want to be the first one to do it, right? So if they looked at it as if nobody had it, that I wouldn't miss out on it, and I think I would actually be pretty cool with it. It was actually quite insightful.
Wow. That might have been the best poll I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe an accurate one, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So again, I don't know where the line is, right? And it's going to be up to people that are much, much smarter than me, because I do think that there are national security concerns, but I also do think that there are significant free speech concerns, right? And as somebody that wants to try to maximize their liberty, anytime the government wants to take away one of my choices, they better have a damn good reason, a really good reason, right? Yep. And they need to do it in the least invasive way that they can do it. So maybe it's not an all-out ban on TikTok. Maybe there's something else that can be done, but my personal choice is I'll never have an account on TikTok.
Yeah. So two final things. So
Yep.
Kids of this generation, did you go back to school in 2015-ish, maybe?
Yeah, I went back to grad school, and I think I graduated in 2017. So 2015 to 2017.
So I was reading up, and you made a comment about how you learned a lot about the millennial folks.
Yep.
Any thoughts on that in terms of just your observation?
A couple of things. One, how they consume media is completely different. And again, I'm teaching now, so I have almost my built-in focus groups with young people. They are getting a majority right now of their political news from TikTok. That's where they are, right? And so and what surrounds them from that standpoint is really, really crucial, right? And so it is very, very easy for YouTube videos and TikTok to lead young people down rabbit holes and really radicalize them very quickly. There's a really interesting study that if you go and watch a video on YouTube about 9/11, right, and you follow 5 of the recommended videos that follow after each one of the videos, you will end up in an extremist website.
Really?
Yes, it happens that quick. And so what surrounds them a lot of times, even as parents and even as people that consume this, I don't think we understand how quickly they can become radicalized, how quickly they can be exposed to the Tates of the world and those jacklegs, right? So that's a major, major concern. But that's where they are. So if you're in a campaign and young people are part of your voting coalition, you have to meet them there. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm seeing that's different than 2015 and 2017 that I'm seeing in the classroom now is this cohort that went through school during COVID. I don't think we can fully appreciate and fully know how damaging COVID was to this entire cohort. when they shut the schools down, and they were going remotely, the kids that we're seeing now in school are behind, significantly behind. They're significantly behind socially, right? Because they missed out on 2 years of school, and they're significantly behind social or where they should be academically. And so I don't think we truly have appreciation of how COVID ravaged an entire part of our youth.
Great observations. So back to the 9/11, it took me to a place because I know where I was, right?
Yep.
I know where I was on the day of the time. I was a senior in high school, what class I was in. We heard about it, how we were glued to the TVs. When I left high school, went and got all the vehicles. We filled them up with gas. Wasn't sure what to do and what was going to happen. But there was no way I thought it was a conspiracy. There's no way I thought it was an inside job. I know Jesse Ventura gets on there and says, look at this and look at that. And there's always a conspiracy, right? JFK and who killed him and whatnot. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about leading people to these conspiracies, believing that hey, your country's not good for you? They're actually bad and brainwashing. Is TikTok possibly so? For the idea was that for many, many years, and maybe still today, that universities are primarily more liberal organizations or their teachings, and so you could go into a university and you come out believing maybe more liberal ideas or ideology. Is that TikTok, right? It's that university. It's having that kind of impact on kids.
It could be.
Do that.
It could be, and I think that's why UF has banned it, right? So if you go on UF's wireless network, you cannot access TikTok.
Wow. Okay.
So UF has banned TikTok. Because there's one of two things. It can take you down a rabbit hole, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be QAnon or any of this. It can take you down, how you think about women, right? If you're a young man, take you down this incel path or whatever. So that is happening. But I don't think we fully appreciate what could happen because, again, we're training them. So let's be silly on this. I'm a young woman in college, and I really look up to Kim Kardashian, right, promoting beauty products. So my TikTok is all beauty products, right? How to do your hair, how to do your makeup. Eventually, we could get to a point to where China could now have AI makeup demonstrators that they put in your stream and start talking about politics, right? So then we can start really gearing off. So I think that's the bigger danger. We're training China on how to activate us. We're training China how to screw with us, how to divide us and make us fight amongst each other. And if you're Russia and if you're China, that's the best case scenario, right? If Americans are fighting each other, I don't have to do it.
No, you don't. I had the observation a few years ago when I was watching some of the national news and some of the stuff with the riots in the streets, and it's blacks versus whites and all this stuff, and it's what the media wants you to think. But I didn't see that here. When I go through a drive-through and I'm being served by somebody that maybe that's supposed to hate me, or I see a friend on the street that doesn't look like me, and it's like, no, there were smiles and friendly. I can appreciate they didn't adopt necessarily what is in the media. How has the media? And this is the last question I want to ask you. How has the media changed that you've seen over your lifetime in terms of its importance and maybe the job and the role they play?
I mean, two major things come to immediate mind, right? One is the almost complete collapse of local media. I think that's a real challenge. The Gainesville Sun, I think their subscriber base now for physical papers is like 6,000. I mean, it is really low. So, we're seeing a prevalence of blogs. We're seeing a prevalence. Now, there's that's democracy, right? But we're also seeing everybody silo off, right? We don't have a common understanding right now of what's happening at City Hall because we're all not using the same information. That's a challenge. The other challenge is, a lot of people that start a blog, they're amateurs, they're doing it on the side. No one's being paid to be the watchdog, right? That's a major problem. If I'm the mayor of Gainesville right now, I don't fear the Gainesville Sun. Mm-hmm. I don't fear any real media in this area because it's become so fragmented and it's very small. So that's one. The other one is obviously the growth in cable news. Cable news is, I think, just awful. And this is somebody that used to have 3 TVs in their office that had CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News on all the time. I don't even watch it anymore because we have opinions that are masquerading as news, right? And it's the same model that clickbait uses and everything in the media now. I have to keep you enraged to keep you watching so that you are angry all the time so that, again, we can show you ads, right? That's the model of Facebook. That's the model of cable news. I think it's awful, and we got to the point to where it got so extreme that Fox News had to pay $700 million because they were just straight up lying, right? That should be a much bigger story, but it's not, So I think cable news is awful.
Well, it looked like the CEO of CNN or whoever it was that came back, or a boss or something, was trying to...
He just got fired, yeah.
It looked like they were trying to bring him... He was, I think, trying to say that we're going to do more news and less of the politics, and the ratings probably still kept going down.
Yep, the ratings went down, they got fired.
Well, so this is the point I think I was trying to make earlier, where the people are ultimately in control.
Yep. Whose fault is it?
They're not watching it. It doesn't sell, right? You take Sean Hannity, for example. Sean Hannity's on Fox News. He doesn't say outrageous stuff. He doesn't have paid events and gigs to run around to. I'm not saying he's a dishonest person. I don't know him personally. You may pick out things that you listen to. One issue I took, Jake, on our last podcast, I talked about this. Tucker Carlson talked about Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin a little bit, but more it was about how his emails were hacked and the government was aware that he was communicating with Russia trying to get this interview. And actually, Mark Levin, I think it is, he had 13 emails there. And my thoughts on that, but with regards to Russia and, going back to the news stuff, give me a second. I'm going with a podcast blank here, Jake.
You can do it.
You think I can get through this?
Been there.
I can do this. Tucker Carlson with Donald Trump. So he talks about Donald Trump's going to be one of the greatest presidents to ever come through our lifetime, blah, blah, blah. Fox News, camera stopped rolling. But text messages, he said something differently.
Sure.
He was saying he was a horrible, horrible person. The problem I have with that is I really, 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 really want to trust the person that I'm listening to. I trusted Neil Bortz to an extent. I took Rush Limbaugh for what he was. I actually liked him a lot. Not that he I believed everything he said, but I thought he was also entertainment, right? And he's getting paid a lot of money to keep people listening. But I want someone who doesn't care about the money, that they are good where they're at in their life. Let's go Megyn Kelly. I like Megyn Kelly. I haven't found the lies just yet. And now she's doing this podcast thing that she does, and so I kind of listen to her clips, and she does a lot of clickbait stuff. Whoa, I see it constantly trying to get your attention, and she's talking about it. But God, give me the watchdog, give me the honest person who doesn't have a dog in the fight. They don't care about going to speak at a convention. They're okay just going, here are the facts, here's the information, and then you decide.
I mean, the issue is with that doesn't sell, right? I mean, Pew Research, right? Mm-hmm. They are kind of one of the couple of gold standards out there. They do great research. It is dry, right? I mean, it is polling. It is just the facts. It's dry, So, but it's news. But the combination of news and entertainment is where we're going off the rails because it has gotten too far on the entertainment side, right? And so, yeah, there's nuggets that you can pull out from anybody that's an entertainer, right? Rush Limbaugh occasionally found something truthful. Tucker said something occasionally truthful. The problem is it's packaged in a whole bag full of nonsense a lot of times, and that's troublesome. It's like, if you watch election returns now, game day, college game day, and election returns are merging into the same thing. Right? I mean, we've got the analysis with the board and showing you the plays, and it's all become entertainment, And so I always go back to the Gladiator. Are you not entertained?
Well, I know that I certainly this is really, really bad. I'm going to say this. I would rather watch a presidential debate than the Super Bowl.
Would you?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's next level nerd stuff.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
What do you like about it? Because I watch them because I have to. Right? I'm not sure I learned anything from them.
No, I think I love watching. So it's like watching the State of the Union. I'm not looking at President Biden. I'm looking at what Kamala, Vice President's doing and the Speaker of the House. I'm watching their facial reactions. It's looking at the questions and we're just watching the human. I don't know what fascinates me about the human reaction to when the question's asked. The gotcha question, right? They got you to go, oh, look, you see them pucker their lips there? Just maybe watching that kind of thing. I don't find I have found for many, many years people saying, yeah, I'm just holding my nose voting for somebody. I've never felt like that till now, actually. I've always felt pretty decent about who I'm voting for. And it's just gotten disgusting to me. I don't know. I will watch, dude. I'll watch some stuff. I'll watch commission meetings of other municipalities on YouTube just because I'm like, oh, it's going down. And then I hear someone talking like it's kind of interesting to me. I'm like, listen to this idiot. What did they just say? I can't believe it. But no, I love debates. I love watching them. I watched every Republican. I'll watch every Democratic primary debate. I'll watch everything. Well, there's not, and that was an interesting one I didn't talk to you about, which was Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg or something like that. Nobody really, maybe it just wasn't a sexy story, or maybe it was out there and it was gone quickly, but I thought he had just won a primary in a state for the Democratic when he was running, and then he just bowed out and Joe Biden became the man.
Oh, you mean 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, after Joe Biden won South Carolina, that was over.
But he had just won a big one. I guess it didn't matter?
It didn't matter in the sense that he was going to have a hard time raising money because inevitability flew on to Joe Biden there. Okay. Because once you got to South Carolina with Joe Biden, then that's when the African-American coalition came into play in the Democratic Party, and it solidly went to old man Joe, right? So then if you start, I could see why Pete's like, okay, there's no path forward for here. I'm out. And now he's transportation secretary, so he played it pretty well.
So this is my last tidbit.
Okay.
Go to the, I think it's 1992. Jake, I'm trying to teach you something here. I feel like you're on TikTok.
No, I'm listening.
Oh, okay. So in 1992, I don't know why I was doing this recently. Richard Nixon was speaking, doing some kind of interview. I think he died in 94. I could be wrong. But in 92, when he was speaking, listening to him talk, listening to him explain the lay of the land, I think he was talking about Russia. Maybe that's what I was looking into. And I was like, this dude was more coherent, educated, and schooled than Joe Biden at his age now and Donald Trump.
Nixon is a complicated man, but you cannot deny his intelligence, right? I mean, this is a self-made man.
I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes.
Is that the checker speech?
In all of my years of public life, never profited from public service. I've earned every cent.
That's checker.
That's an older one, though, right?
Yeah, that's an older one. That's the checker speech, a famous speech, right? Where he said, okay, you can have everything back, but you can't have my dog. Anyway, it's a great speech. I mean, highly intelligent. Obviously, he got in a little bit of trouble there, had a little bit of trouble with Vietnam, but he had a good lay of the land as far as what was happening in the world. He's responsible for opening up China. So it's a real mixed bag there. He's a complicated man, but you cannot deny his intelligence and his work ethic.
I think that's the biggest thing that's missing for me is getting somebody who can just communicate, because I think that's what Barack Obama, I thought, did brilliantly. I thought
he's a great communicator.
I mean, and that's what you have to do, right? You got to be able to speak and make people feel your passion, and also do it in a convincing way. And I just think we can do better. I do.
Well, it is what it is.
Well, we're gonna have a choice.
So you're gonna have a choice.
You're
You're gonna have to pick, right? I mean, woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's going to be the longest general election cycle in my lifetime, and I think it's going to be absolutely miserable. Because again, 90+% of the electorate knows exactly who they're going to vote for right now. Right? So we're going to spend the next 7.5, 8 months yelling at each other to try to convince minds that are never going to be convinced. And then some event in the closing weeks is likely to decide the election.
Interesting.
We saw that with even Trump and Hillary Clinton. When Comey came out with his letter, that's a big part of the election.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so it's going to be so interesting because I do think that Michigan is a state that's in play. Michigan has a significant Muslim population. So that could become a significant issue for President Biden as he moves forward. Now Donald Trump, I think, we don't know what's going to happen with his criminal trials. If those things happen and there's cameras in the courtroom and he is convicted, all of our polling shows us that is really, really going to matter. Right?
Help him or hurt him?
Hurt him significantly,
Okay.
especially with voters that aren't going to tune in, right? If you don't have a very strong opinion of Donald Trump and you only know him from The Apprentice and you don't really like politics, but the last 2 weeks of the election, you see them as a criminal defendant and it's not going well, that's going to matter, right? And then the other thing is, has Donald Trump done anything to broaden the Republican Party since he last lost the election? That's going to be an interesting question to ask, especially when you have the RNC, when you have his surrogates out there saying, if you're a rhino, we are going to eject you from this party. We don't want you in this party. Have a good life. That's going to be a significant hurdle potentially down the road, right? Because he's going to need the rhinos to come home because they're going to be an easier vote to get than a Democrat switching. So we got to figure it out.
You lose in 2020. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to sail away and never be seen again.
Yep.
It's over. And the clout and the power that you have is supposed to be sort of gone, and who's the next person that steps up? You're not Barack Obama, who leaves after 8 years and 2 terms. You lost, and you lost in your midterm elections as well.
Yep. Donald Trump has never followed the rules in politics. Never.
He's also never lost.
And why would we expect it? Right? He has lost. He lost the Senate. He lost the House.
Did you ask him that?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. But yeah, that's something that I won't entertain. Right? Donald Trump lost that election, fair and square. Lost the election.
It's actually how.
And that has cost me business. That has cost me friends. He lost that election.
Well, I've said the same thing. I've got great family who sort of don't believe it, and friends, and that's fine. And it's not no offense. And the reason I stand by that is because look what happened in the election with Herschel Walker. Mm-hmm. He lost the same way.
Same way.
And so
And so you asked me earlier about running a base campaign or applying to the middle. One of the challenges is when you get so based, right, and you just run base, you're no longer able to get to a majority of the electorate, and so you become this entropy, right? You have purged yourself into a minority party, and that is actually my fear as we move forward at the national level, that we are purging ourselves into a minority party. Now, it's not going to happen in the state of Florida. It's not going to happen in red states. You're not going to see it there because of how we live and how we have done districts. But if you look at it at a national level, we've only won the popular vote at the national level one time in the past, 8 elections, right? That's a challenge. Mm-hmm. And I've not seen anything out of the RNC or out of the Trump campaign that's expanding the coalition.
Why do you think they're so hard-headed to not do something different if it's not working?
Well, because they're convinced they've never lost. They've convinced themselves that they did not lose the election. It was taken from them. Therefore, there's no reason to do anything different. We can just keep doubling and tripling down.
Well, when that argument comes up about the election, what they're trying to say is, well, there are people who believe it was really, really stolen. I think higher IQ individuals who talk about it are saying, well, it wasn't stolen like they manufactured votes, but it was stolen because of COVID. States changed their laws that allowed Democrats to pile in more votes than Republicans could. See, Sean Hannity's changed his tune right now. Sean Hannity now
it's because they had to pay a lot of money.
Well, a bunch of and he's also saying now you got to beat them at their game. We have to vote early.
This drives me nuts. And I know we're trying to wrap up, but it drives me crazy. When I started in politics, especially in Florida, one of the things that Republicans did, hands down, 18 times better than Democrats, was mail-in ballots. We pressed and pressed and pressed for absentee ballots. We would bank these ballots. It caused us and helped us win campaigns. We trained an entire generation to vote absentee, right? Get your vote in early, vote absentee, be done with it. Then we don't have to worry about the 80-year-old reliable Republican voter getting to the polls on the day of and standing in a line, right?
Yep.
And Donald Trump blew that all up, blew it up, to where there's a large swath now of the Republican Party that do not believe that absentee ballots are going to be secure, right? I mean, you can say what you want to about Florida. Florida runs pretty buttoned up elections, especially after we got through that butterfly ballot. There we go. Florida runs great elections. Our returns are in, they're done, they're counted, right? The challenge is people don't understand that the states set their own rules. So one of the things that Florida does really, really well, they allow absentee votes to be counted before Election Day. So when you send your absentee ballot in, the supervisor election can open it and tally it. So the first votes that we get returned on election night are absentee ballots. Other states' laws say they can't open them and begin to count them until the polls closed. So that's when you see absentee ballots taking 2-3 days to count, or you seeing them being counted and dumped in the middle of the night.
Okay.
That's one of the major differences. So it has to do with the laws in the states not being uniformed. There are timing differences. So anyway, it just drives me crazy.
Well, the issue for me on that whole stolen part, Georgia, for example.
Yep.
They're a Republican governor with Republican leadership.
Yep.
They stole it. They wanted it gone.
Makes no sense.
It doesn't for me.
I mean, if you're trying to make the case that the election was stolen in Florida, makes no sense. None.
I'll share this with you. I saw a local election, nonpartisan municipal election, firsthand, where the Democratic Party came in, ran. And they can do this. They're allowed to do it. The candidate's not really supposed to participate with them. But the young Democrats knocked on doors. The Democratic Party knocked on doors. But then they organized a postcard campaign where all the Democrats in that area, in that municipality, got postcards from all over the country, handwritten, saying, "Vote for my friend." I saw the cards.
Right.
They were incredible. I'm like,
there's nothing wrong with any of that. That's not a stolen election.
But that's
campaigning.
And so I think where Sean Hannity's going is it's time to catch up. Well, you better. You're going to struggle. Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, we've done that on the Republican side too, right?
Well, then go back to it.
Because I firmly believe, right, and the data will show you, nonpartisan elections are silly, right? Because in almost all cases, the voters very quickly find out who's the Republican and who's the Democrat.
They ask that question.
They ask that question, and then there are outside players that are always willing to say that.
Yep.
Now, the other reason, the other data point I tell you that I don't think nonpartisan elections are the panacea that people think they are, is there's significant data even in judge races. Judges have an extra set of rules on top of them that they are not to be political, right? It is very, very easy in a judicial race, if you're paying attention, to figure out who the Republican is and who the Democrat is and what party they belong to. Because again, you have outside actors, right? And then there are just key phrases. If I'm running a Republican judge, I'm going to tell you they're not going to legislate from the bench. You know they're conservative, you know they're Republican, and we can go on about our day, right? So nonpartisanship is almost like a fallacy.
Yeah.
I just don't think, especially in this hyper partisan world that we live in, they just don't exist.
Jake.
Yes.
Your microphone. Are you
Hello?
Are you going to vote this year?
Yes.
Is there anything that we said that persuaded you to vote for one candidate or another?
No, this wasn't a really political conversation. This
See,
was
now
more
that's
of
what
the
I'll-
structure of the.
It was good stuff. It was objective, I think. So that's important because I know that you were on TikTok getting your news.
Where do you get your news from, Jake?
Twitter mostly.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't understand the whole X thing, but that's okay. I don't know why he changed the name of it. I don't know.
He's got long-term plans, to combine. He wants to make the master app, which is going to be digital currency, all that kind of thing. But I think it's a guy that bought X.com years ago and just wanted to use it.
Alex Patton, I appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you
problem.
for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.